Hello and welcome to the FMCC webinar, Space Utilization, not just about the dollar savings, the impact of agile working, presented by Simon Davis, live from Toronto. Next slide, please. I do want to let everyone know they have been muted for audio quality. If at any time during this webinar you do have any questions, please feel free and type them into the question box on your control panel, and I'll be happy to present them to Simon during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Also, if you'd like a PDF copy of the PowerPoint, one is available for download on your control panel under the handout section. This webinar is being recorded, and a recording will be placed on the FMCC website in the coming weeks. Next slide, please. The FMCC does like to let everyone know about their vision and mission statements and what their purpose is. Next slide, please. And the FMCC provides many services to the FM community, such as Ask the Expert, Find a Consultant, Locate a Speaker, and online educational resources. You may find more information on their website, fmcc.ifma.org. You're fine, next slide. And the FMCC just likes to thank their sponsors. Next slide. And the reason we are all gathered here today, World FM Day. So I thank you for joining us in this celebration of the FM profession from literally around the world. We've kicked off in Auckland, New Zealand Monday, and we've been having presentations around the world since. Next slide, please. And in honor of that, we have put together a virtual conference of over 30 presentations. Next slide, please. And so this is just a snapshot of some of the people that will be presenting during our, it's going to be a total of 4 days that started Monday. So there's still plenty of time for you to join in on remaining webinars. Next slide, please. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Simon Davis, Vice President, Business Development for SeeArm. He's also Vice President for Cornet, Arizona chapter. He's IFMA IT Community Global Liaison and contributor to the 2017 FM Guide to IT. And not to mention, he has 18 years of experience in real estate technology. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Simon.
Great, thank you, Joshua, and hello to everybody on the phone. Certainly appreciate the time that you're going to spend with me this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. What we want to do today was really cover 4 key learning objectives associated with agile work and really looking at the fact that agile is not solely a cost-cutting or cost-saving exercise. What I really want to cover in the next hour or so is really talk a little bit about why are companies moving to a modern workplace, how utilization of space impacts that move, how you can utilize readily available tools within the IT arena to track and understand how the space is being used, and then also just how to develop a business case if you're considering or wishing to move to a modern workplace, or indeed if proactively you're encouraging, following this presentation, your organization to look at modern workplace as a potential strategy. From the agenda perspective, I do like to start off with some key definitions, so really hopefully level set the playing field so everybody has a common understanding of terminology. Talk about why does this matter, some of the business drivers behind Agile. Talk about IoT or Internet of Things tools that can help the move to Agile. The benefits of tracking utilization. Talk about the benefits also of Agile working. I'll cover a brief case study of an organization based in Australia who had some great successes with moving to Agile work. And then finally, I'll talk about some of the other benefits and measures of success associated with the topic. So starting off with just some key definitions, Agile has certainly become something that's becoming more and more prominent within the workplace. And what I really like to equate it to is flexibility of work. So it's providing strategies and environments in which people can work when, where, and how they want. So sometimes there's a misconception that Agile means work from home. And although work from home can be a component of an Agile workplace, it's certainly not the only one or not one of the larger drivers. Agile is often synonymous with activity-based work, which really is just looking at how people are doing business differently in this current day and age. We're moving away from environments where it's hierarchies and silos of business departments to environments where collaborative working and engagement are really critical in delivering successful results, no matter what type of product or services you're providing. So, really moving to enable settings that help you to work more efficiently. And the reason it's called activity-based is because it's geared very much around that. What kinds of activities need to be supported? Traditionally, maybe you have a marketing team on the 3rd floor and an IT team on the 5th floor and a HR team on the 10th floor. For many organizations, they're working on a project or activity basis, which says, well, actually, for the next 6 months, we need people from each of these 3 departments to be working in the same area in order to maximize the delivery of the projects that they're working on. 2 other definitions that really call more towards how Agile can be enabled. One is simply utilization tracking, which is looking at how space is being used and when that space is being used. The when is very important because with the how, you really just get a small piece of the picture. And then the final component, which hopefully most people on the line are aware of, is the Internet of Things. This is really, in simple terms, just the fact that any device that can be connected to the Internet can potentially be a source of data exchange. We'll talk about some of those elements today. Depending on what figures you read, Internet of Things connected devices are going to be somewhere between 20 million and 3 billion by 2020. So IoT is becoming a real driver just globally in the world. If you don't think you use IoT devices, you probably do. A data-enabled cell phone, for example, is essentially an IoT device, something that can share data from multiple different sources and locations. So you may be thinking, why does this matter to me? And I really like to set the scene there. You may or may not be aware, but when it comes to costs in any organization, the cost of your real estate facilities is often one of the largest expenses, and most cases is the 2nd largest expense behind the expenses associated with salaries and benefits. So the cost component is certainly very critical. And being able to contain or control those costs is something that's becoming very predominant within the industry, primarily driven by point number 2, that industry averages look at about a 49% utilization of space. So in very simple terms, that means that most offices are only, or most space in an office is only occupied about half of the time, meaning that most organizations have some flexibility that they might want to determine what their appropriate strategy is for that excess space. An interesting statistic that I also heard recently is that of those 50% of people that are in the office, they're only in their designed or designated space 34% of the time. So if you factor in that, only half of your work or only half of your desks are occupied, and a third of the time they're occupied by, the person they're assigned to, the rest of the time that person could be in a collaborative space, they could be in a shared zone with other resources, they could be in meeting rooms. It really points to the need to start tracking how space is being utilized in order to right-size the portfolio and look at potential savings, both from a cost perspective and other elements that I'll talk to later. Agile is also a very key aspect when it comes to two components related to your employees, which is the attraction and retention of talent. So Agile environments are gaining a lot more prominence. A statistic that I read recently is that 58% of HR professionals cite flexibility in work as the #1 reason why people are choosing particular roles. So it's very, very key that the workplace itself embodies that component and provides flexibility and provides agility in terms of how people work. From the CEO perspective, they're concerned about the availability of resources, and indeed from an employee perspective, scary number that 85% of the global workforce is actively or passively looking for a new employer. So Agile environments can help make the workplace more attractive to your existing employees and also to potential new recruits. And I'll touch upon that in more detail a little bit later on in the presentation. So what does the workplace look like today? Well, certainly it depends on where you are. So there will be a little bit of generalization here. But what I'm seeing in the industry and certainly in clients that I'm working with in my role is that we do, in many cases, still have a traditional workplace. One-to-one allocation of seats, cubicles as the prime driver or housing of the employees. And many companies are looking at their space simply through manual auditing. Could be potentially hundreds of Excel spreadsheets in order to try and track some of those utilization components. On the other side, in terms of the workplace of today, or a traditional workplace, we really find that, as you'll see from this visual, a few things that may resonate depending on your organization, but you see high walls, which certainly can inhibit collaboration. You don't actually see people on the floor. I think there's a large misconception sometimes that space is being utilized more often than it actually is. And when I look at this, I, in some respects, see dollar signs in the fact that we've got unnecessary costs associated with our space. So that's been sort of the traditional focus on the workplace. Where we're seeing things changing now is certainly in the evolution of the workplace. So going from an environment where I come to work and on day one I'm given the cubicle that I sit in and that I can store my belongings in, that really can only be impacted from a space management perspective by either looking at how space is being allocated or potentially charging business units back for my resources, to a more hybrid view, which has some traditional space. Please note that I'm not saying that traditional is dead, but I think it's only fit for certain purposes, but those purposes still need to be supported. It's really where hybrid comes in. It comes, with a mixture of traditional and modern space. From a space planning and management perspective, you can also then start to look at how is that agile or flexible space being utilized. And one of the benefits it affords to the employees is it gives them more flexibility and mobility in terms of where to work. The evolution is moving rapidly in many organizations, countries, and areas of the world to what we would refer to as modern or Workplace 2020. This is an environment which is activity-based, which predominantly is free address. So nobody has a designated or defined space they go to every day. They're picking spaces on a regular basis or daily basis based on their interactions, based on their need. That also affords the ability to track real-time utilization, so understanding, at a very granular level, which I'll go into shortly, how that space is being utilized, and very importantly, what space is being used. This enables companies to develop appropriate ratios of employees to space in order to determine what their portfolio should look like. The big benefit to the employee on that front has proven to be both collaboration and productivity. So where an employees are given the chance to work when, where, and how they want, they're a lot more productive, and it does encourage more collaboration, or something that I heard referred to at an IFMA event today, casual collision. So, the ability to actually interact with people because of the workplace has been set to be more modern and more encouraging of collaboration and engagement. So I'm just going to do a very quick poll here. So where does your company, or if you're a consultant or a service provider, the companies you work with, fall today in terms of those three components? Would you class your company as A, traditional, B, hybrid, or C, modern? And Joshua, I'm not sure if there's something you need to do to get the poll moving. Okay, I'm not seeing the poll come through. We can run through this. What I predominantly find is that most companies are somewhere between the traditional and the hybrid model, with certain entities and types of companies moving more towards the modern version. What I'm going to talk about today is really that focus on modern and the benefits that can afford. So with that, I'm going to start talking just about some of the Internet of Things technologies, tools that can enable the agile environment. So firstly, I think it's very important to note there are multiple different tools and devices, and I'm just going to, given the time limitations, going to concentrate on a few that I see as being prevalent within the industry. But rest assured there are options, and I'll talk a bit about the benefits and the pitfalls of each of these options as we go through the presentation. IoT, I think, again, is another misconception that it requires some really high-powered, high-cost, capital-intensive devices in order to be able to track utilization. That isn't the case, or that's not the entire picture. With many organizations, you can get very valuable utilization data simply by using badge swipe information. So if your company, or again, the companies that you work with, have got badging capabilities for getting in and out of the office, that is actually an IoT capability that can help you track utilization. More advanced capabilities include things like beacons. So by connecting a device through Bluetooth, for example, it can track the positioning of where you are within your particular space, and additionally sensors. So either lighting-based or ceiling-based sensors that again can track the utilization of space. I personally see, one of the stronger capabilities, and I'll talk to the reasons why in terms of tracking utilization, being where clients are looking at using data associated to their Wi-Fi and wired access. So when I'm logged into my machine, whether I'm hardwired or whether I'm on the Wi-Fi, being able to track utilization on that basis. There's definitely a lot of different considerations when it comes to IoT in terms of what you're looking to achieve. From a hardware perspective, I've outlined 6 here that I'll briefly walk you through. But these are certainly things that you should be considering when you start looking at how IoT can help you enable an agile environment. So the first of those questions is, are you looking at data in real time, or are you looking at delayed information? There are benefits and pitfalls to both. Certainly when I look at real-time data, the benefit there certainly is in getting a greater granularity of information. Oftentimes delayed data, which certainly does include badging information, can only give me very limited data. So if you think of a badge when you go into the office in the morning, you tap on your security sensor and you walk through the door, all that we're really recording in that instance is that Simon is in the office. Where we look at real-time information, so if I'm connected to Wi-Fi or wired, for example, then we can actually fully understand how Simon works throughout the day. So perhaps part of the day he's at a desk, part of the day he's in a collaborative area, and part of the day he's in a phone booth or a quiet area. So being able to understand that granularity certainly gives you better data points for decision-making, space planning, and workplace strategy. But not to say that the delayed or badge-based data doesn't provide some benefits. It certainly gives you a great foundation. A second core component is, when we're looking at data, is the collection of that information either passive or active? And simply what we mean by that perspective is, does it require the employee to do something in order for that data to be captured? So active might relate to, roofing sensors that simply are actually tracking individuals as they go through the space. Passive might be an application that requires a download or connectivity. So, for example, some Bluetooth sensors require you to be actually connected to the devices in question. Additionally, and certainly a concern when it comes to tracking of information, is looking at is the user being identified or remaining anonymous. This brings out a wealth of other questions related to HR policies, concerns over Big Brother, etc. But in reality, to me, the core components are, are you looking at identifying on a either a name basis, or are you looking at that data being more rolled up and anonymized? I personally, when I look at IoT and I look at Agile, I see the real benefit in when people are actually identified, because a peripheral benefit of what we're doing in the Agile world is that if we are looking at real-time utilization, for example, in an environment where Simon can be identified, then I can also afford myself to use tools such as wayfinding capabilities to say, okay, Simon's in the office, where is he right now? If that data was anonymous, that level wouldn't be possible. We do recognize that at certain levels in an organization or for certain individuals, you might want to keep data anonymous. And we also recognize that some geographies and some legislative areas do require more anonymity when it comes to tracking of people-related information. And in those scenarios, you can still get very good benefit by looking at the roll-up of a person in terms of their role and in terms of their business unit. So it might not say that Simon is in the office at this time, but it might say that, marketing person A is in the office from this time to this time, and then you can roll up the data and get more valuable information from that. Precision level is very simply looking at what level do you want to be able to understand the data. Traditionally in space management, there are 3 main levels: building related, floor related, or actual individual space related. Again, this is dependent upon what you're looking to achieve and also the technology investment you're looking at. From a building basis, badging data can provide you with that level of information. From a precision basis, if you want to get real granularity, again, it's really looking at the wired and the Wi-Fi based information. Coverage is also an important factor. So, when it does come to installing of sensors, beacons, etc., how far an area can they cover is very key when you're looking at your strategy and planning that out. So that's something that you want to consider. And finally, and certainly very importantly, hardware consideration when you're considering IoT is what is the cost. So looking at any capital investment plus any ongoing fees associated with the devices. As I've mentioned, and I'll continue to mention, I find that companies can start off very quickly using badge-based data and get a lot of very useful information from that while they're determining what other technologies they might want to invest in. This is really just an overview of what I just spoke through. Looking at those considerations, the 6 that I referenced down the left-hand side, and across the top, those 4 main sources of utilization data. So this really just gives you a bit more detail around what I just mentioned. I'm not going to walk you through this, but as Joshua mentioned, you can download the PDF and you can certainly review that at your own pace. And again, this is indicative, so I'm sure there are other or particular sensors and beacons, for example, that have different levels of coverage, etc. But this is our perspective on what we see in the market right now. I think it's also very important to notice that, or to note that this is an evolution. So it's not simply a case that I need to go out now and I need to buy, lighting sensors or Wi-Fi and wired. From an agile perspective, I can start gathering information and making business decisions based on something as simple as an occupancy audit, or as I mentioned, badge swiping information can give you another level of granularity. Effectively, as you evolve, you're going to get different levels of information. I find clients that effectively are managing agile work are actually oftentimes using more than one source. So maybe they're using badge swipe data to understand entry information, but then they're also using a more granular detail like Wi-Fi or wired to understand the actual utilization of space on a floor-by-floor basis. So we've talked a bit about the technologies that can be employed. What I want to talk about for the next few minutes is the benefits that can be afforded from them. I'm going to talk about 4 main benefits that can be afforded just on the utilization tracking piece, and then we'll talk a bit about the benefits of Agile as a strategy as a whole. But where we really like to focus is, in aiding and assisting space management teams and strategic teams in being able to make quick decisions based upon their space. So how do I most appropriately model my portfolio? How do I look and what should I be looking at in terms of ideal ratios for my seating? From a heat map perspective, where can I see hot and cold areas within my portfolio? So, where am I want to focus more in one specific instance or focus less? I think heat mapping gives you some great information, but for me, the core of heat mapping is it enables you to have a quick view, particularly if you have a large portfolio, about what are the core hot or cold areas right now and the things that we do want to address. The third component that I referred to earlier is looking at real-time locations. So being able to actually, because you're tracking how space is being utilized in real time, being able to see where somebody is and also seeing if they're available. And then the final component is employee enablement. We won't have time to go into the details of a program that involves transitioning to Agile, but certainly one of the core components of that would be the cultural impact. So if you're in an environment, for example, now that's fixed and maybe you have your own office, as soon as people start talking about moving to Agile, you're instantly going to be thinking, I'm going to lose my space, I'm going to lose my privacy, I'm going to have noise issues, etc. There's a whole cultural change management process that goes around that. But one of the aspects that I see as being very key is that regardless of what technology or tools you select, you need to ensure that the experience for the end user is better after you've completed the Agile move than it was before. So you really need to focus on ensuring that there's a lot of employee satisfaction once the move has been completed, and certainly enabling employees with tools that help them to quickly identify, for example, where is there a desk or where is there a meeting room is a key tracker on that front. So portfolio modeling, really just going to talk about a few of the components here, but you'll see, firstly, when we look at utilization tracking, it gives us very quick and easy visuals to access. As we move to Agile work, companies are working in a large degree in defining their portfolios in different ways than they traditionally have. The focus is shifting away from being, a pure aspect of looking at cost per square foot and cost per person, to looking at cost per person. Because really, from a real estate perspective, it doesn't matter what you're paying per square foot if your space isn't being utilized. So from a systematic perspective, this visual is actually showing me on the main map two different things. One, it's showing me areas where I have allocated to certain business units, and on the right-hand side, it's also showing me that as a neighborhood. So as I mentioned earlier, traditional space management would be one-to-one, person to space, often organized on a more hierarchical basis from a business unit perspective. What this is really showing you is modeling a portfolio based upon having neighborhoods of work. In addition to that, within each neighborhood, you can then determine what you want the appropriate ratios of people to seats to be. So on the right-hand side here, you're going to see some of those components. In this particular instance, there's 107 what we call work points, or desks and spaces where you can work, but 112 people assigned. So we have more people assigned than workspaces. And indeed, when we look at our capacity, we have the ability for another 16 people on this specific location. So it's very quickly giving the end user the ability to model the portfolio. For me, the key number here, and one of the most important, is actually the peak utilization. So what this is basically doing is it's changing this from just a static exercise in space management to an active exercise in utilization, where I can actually see, where is the most over the last 3 months that my space has ever been used. In this particular example, our peak has been 76. So, you can see that there's an opportunity in that front of 31 in that particular instance. 71% utilization, you can very quickly see that that means that over a quarter of my space is not being utilized at my peak. So in this particular example, I might say, okay, my ratio of people to seats is actually incorrect. I can make it more optimal. Heatmap analysis, really this is then taking that utilization data and overlaying it on top of floor plans. So you'll see on the right-hand side elements on a floor. You can see the particularly hot areas, so areas that are frequently utilized, and then you can see the colder spaces. So from a business perspective, I'm going to focus on those. So we have these two areas that are very hot, this one here as well. I'm going to want to understand why are they so well utilized. And conversely, I'm going to understand why this, a 14-person conference room is blue. So this means it's not being used very much at all. So Heatmap analysis can give you some very quick indicators on where you might have pain points. From a workplace strategy perspective, particularly if you're going agile, you might want to convert this into, phone booth type scenarios, so people actually getting more use of the space. That clearly is a decision that would have to be taken with a real knowledge of the portfolio in question. But the heat maps give you some ability to understand where to start. That data can also then be rolled up, so you can actually see across your portfolio, if you have a global portfolio, what particular areas or countries are being better utilized. In this example here, we can see that in the territories in the Americas that we're having our portfolio, we're at about at least an 80% utilization, whereas in Australia, our numbers are closer to 60 to 80. So again, having the ability through data to understand where I want to focus is very, very key. I'll point to it once more, but also here again, the peak utilization for this location really indicates to me that at least 20% of my space is not utilized on a regular basis. Real-time locating, I'm just going to run through this quickly, but this is really the ability that you can, again, as part of employee enablement, as you walk into the building in the morning, you can quickly see, what space is available, and if appropriate, you can reserve a space. So this is looking at real-time demand-based activities. I can determine which particular floor I want to go into, and even at that point, I can also look at, is there a particular conference room I need that's available right now? I can look at the associated resources for that conference room. You'll also see a locator showing where I am at that particular point. But this gives me the ability, again, in real time, to maximize my utilization of my conference room facilities in this particular instance. Additionally, as I stated at the outset, being able to use real-time locating and availability also enables me to find individuals. So as I'm walking into the office, maybe I need to see Ben, and I can quickly see that Ben is actually in the conference room. So this really just gives you that level of granularity and access that you can make very quick use of the data. This particular screen is actually based on a kiosk, but most platforms will also provide mobile capabilities, so you can be doing this from your device literally as you're walking into the office. So that's just some of the benefits of utilization tracking. Now what I want to talk about, and maybe what some of you have been holding your breath waiting for on the phone, is the business benefits of Agile work. So, you know, we've talked about IoT tools, we've talked about the benefits of utilization tracking. Utilization tracking is ultimately a means that you can help evolve into a more agile working environment. What I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is the benefits of that agile environment. So one of the most obvious, I would say, is looking at right-sizing the portfolio. So as I have mentioned a few times, when we're looking at moving to agile, essentially what you're looking at doing is maximizing the use of your space. So based upon how the space is being used today, how much space do you actually need? There is oftentimes a misunderstanding that, you know, agile is about shoving more people into the same amount of space. So, you know, looking at those components of densification. That's not true. You know, companies are actually using this to offer more flexibility to their employees, more ways of working. But in order to do that, they definitely need to understand how the space is being utilized. But agile work can certainly help you right-size your portfolio, and that's a very, very important aspect to talk about, is the right sizing. So maybe I have excess space that's leased or that I own, and I have the ability to sublease that. Maybe as I look at my data from utilization tracking in conjunction with my leases, I can see that actually we're not using this space that much, so perhaps we should consider getting out of the lease. And even if it's an owned operation and we have space that's not used, you know, we can look at actually shutting that space down just to save on the expense. I'm seeing an interesting trend with some very large companies right now who are using tools that are IoT-based to track utilization. And where appropriate, they're actually consolidating portfolios, moving people to a common location that still has ample space to support their needs. But what they're doing with the excess space is actually refitting the space. In some instances, co-branding and working with companies like WeWork, and then actually offering that space out as a co-working facility to third parties. I find that really intriguing because what you're talking about there, you know, is moving away from just being able to save on costs and expenses to using your space as a revenue generator. So I think that's an interesting adoption that's going to continue to grow and grow. From a cost perspective, one example, so American Express have a very well-established program called Blue Work. They essentially have a 4-to-3 ratio of people to desks. But Blue Work is really focusing on flexibility. Amex also determine, you know, who their users are, which I think is a very important thing to do when you're looking at Agile. And they categorize people into 4 main categorizations, which are hub, club, home, and roam. So a user who is categorized as hub, essentially it means that he or she is predominantly in one specific location. If I'm categorized as club, it means that I'm in multiple locations. So I don't necessarily have a designated space at one spot, but I am using multiple American Express facilities. Home, very self-explanatory, is I'm home-based. And roam is those people like myself that spend more time in hotel rooms or at client sites than they do in their own office. So American Express has developed the whole program, you know, and once they have allocated people to the appropriate group, that they can then also look at those specific ratios. As I mentioned, 4-to-3 is the current ratio. And just by doing that, they've improved both worker productivity, and they're also saving between $10 and $15 million a year annually in real estate costs. So there's certainly a lot of bottom line benefits that can be derived from an agile working environment. A second component is talent retention. So as I mentioned earlier, the ability of providing employees, including existing employees, with more flexibility in how they work in an agile environment really does help in ensuring that people are staying put in specific locations. The aspects of, you know, providing a fit-for-purpose office, I think, are certainly getting more and more key, and they're becoming more drivers in keeping people at organizations. There's a lot of conversation right now about millennials, but I think it's an interesting statistic that, you know, oftentimes millennials leave at an average of about 2 years. So companies are going to have to make their workplaces more, what I refer to as sticky, in order to encourage people to stay. From the same basis, they want to make things sticky and attractive in order to encourage talent to come and work for them. So an agile workplace, as I mentioned earlier, 58% of HR professionals cite that as being the top reason for selecting a particular place of employment. And it really is a very important aspect to understand. I think the economy is changing rapidly, with our digital economy moving to a gig economy, and just really the wants, needs, desires of people at any age within the workplace. It's really being driven, by working somewhere they feel comfortable, somewhere that they feel, an affinity to. I recently heard somebody describe your workplace as being the body language of your company, and I think that's very, very important because it truly is a representation of what your company stands for. So the talent side is certainly a key aspect of why agile environments are a good thing to invest in outside of just the pure dollar savings. Additionally, and I mentioned this earlier on, but looking at collaboration and productivity. There have been a lot of research done in terms of how agile environments can improve productivity. And I think in very simple terms, when people are engaged, happy at work, and then they have options of how, where, and when they work, then they are going to be more collaborative and they're going to be more productive. There is a lot of empirical evidence backing that up, and certainly if anybody would want to be pointed in the direction of some of that evidence, I'd be more than happy to share that with you. Additionally, from the collaboration perspective and productivity, there are ways of tracking this. I think people are concerned that, it's very difficult to put your finger on productivity measure increases, but the AWA has actually got 6 factors that they look at, particularly when focusing on knowledge workers. So, bear in mind this doesn't apply to every kind of worker, but those people that effectively think for a living, their productivity is significantly enhanced when they feel that there is social cohesion within the workplace they're working in, where they can feel that there is supervisory support within the environment, where information is freely shared, and when there is external outreach. And I think it's certainly a key aspect. Again, that productivity level can be increased significantly in an agile workplace. And I think it's important that, the agile environment does have the appropriate factors when it comes to the human resources component. So supervisory support is one thing, but I think additionally, you really need to ensure that when you're going agile, that you do have buy-in and in fact leadership from the top. It's no good opening up an environment where there's multiple different ways of working, the proverbial beanbag in the corner, if the CEO or the C-suite aren't buying into that same methodology. If a company is taking away everybody's offices apart from certain, C-suite or VP level, that's not a good message to give to the rest of the employees. And indeed, in some of those environments, that can actually negatively affect productivity when people feel that, there's unfair treatment in that workplace. So it's an interesting piece to look into. Again, would certainly suggest anybody with an interest take a look at the AWA information in this area. It's very powerful. Employee engagement. So again, looking really at how the environment is communicating to the employees, what the company is all about. So being able to provide people with choice and transparency really is key in order to help push forward some core aspects of any business, interactivity amongst employees, innovation. Certainly the collaborative nature of business is very important to ensure that those employees are fully engaged. I think this is a great quote because, there's a lot of research about millennials and the impact in the workplace, and I really like Richard's comment here. And I certainly see some truth in this, that I think that although a lot of work and discussion is done about the impacts of different ages, I think as human beings, people want the ability to work when they want to and where they need to. And I would probably add to that in an appropriate environment for the work that they're carrying out. So, when people are looking at agile environments and they're citing things like noise and privacy concerns, agile is not about taking away every single office from a portfolio. Agile is about enabling flexible ways of working. So certainly there should, and I would strongly advocate in an agile environment, there should be ample space for private conversations, confidential discussions. There should be quiet areas, but it's really ensuring that you get the right balance of those versus, collaborative areas, open spaces, in order to ensure you can deliver maximum value from your workplace. I wanted to talk about a case study of a company that we've worked with in the past, really just to give you an idea for how they moved from a fixed environment to an agile environment. The company in question is an Australian-based bank headquartered out of Brisbane, Australia, with about 95 billion in assets, at the time around 15,000 employees and 650 sites. They were managing the majority of their portfolio at that time on paper plans and Excel spreadsheets. As they were deciding and considering whether to move to Agile, they came up with 3 questions which I think are very pertinent. The first question is, why are you doing this? So, what is the business driver behind a massive cultural and workplace organizational shift to an Agile environment? Secondly, once you've done this, how do we know that it's worked? So what are the success factors? And then the third component is, how much are you willing to invest back into the organization as part of the process? So I think it's important, no matter what size your organization, if you are considering Agile, you want to consider these questions. Why are you doing it? How do I know if it's been a success? And what investment is the company prepared to put back into the organization? From Suncor's perspective, the reason for why was actually that they'd been acquiring many companies, and they wanted to bring together the cross-functional teams they developed under the brand One Company, Many Brands. So that was a real driver for them. Collaboration was definitely a key aspect of what they were looking for. And that was their key success measure. So, being able to create a collaborative environment, an environment that could attract and retain talent with increased productivity, was a very key aspect, whilst also wanting to look at the ability to save resources across their footprint. From an investment perspective, they agreed up front that 10% of the savings would be invested back into the workplace. So the premise was that whatever they saved could be invested back in to improve the quality of the workplace. They did face challenges along the way, certainly, as I'm sure many companies do. They had really a lack of an accurate single view of the data. So because things were managed on spreadsheets, they didn't necessarily know exactly how well their space was being even allocated, never mind utilized. Strategic planning from a business perspective was very difficult because, again, it was reliant mainly on spreadsheets. And also there was concerns over limited executive buy-in, and I mentioned previously that's definitely a component that needs to be driven forward when engaging in this type of an operation. What they did to overcome those challenges was 4 main things. One, which I would strongly advocate in any technology program, whether it be enablement of Agile, whether it be implementation of a IFMA system, anything of that nature. Really, you need to look at engaging business champions. So people from the business that are going to stand up and say, this is why we're doing this is the benefit, and this is really the reason. From a workplace perspective, people do look at 3 main components when you're changing the workplace. What is the impact on me as an individual? What is the impact on my team? And what is the impact on the business? I think it's very important that the business champions really push that information down. From an individual perspective, for example, I've seen a very eloquent argument that, okay, maybe you're giving up your office, but now because we're going to an Agile environment, you have a lot more opportunity of where you can work. You have a lot more options of how you can work, and potentially there is components of a home-based plan within that as well. The second mechanism for implementing the workplace is looking at the obstacles. So where are those challenges, and what processes can we develop to overcome those challenges? From a management perspective, certainly you need to understand what training do we need to do in order that all of our managers are also buying into the process. And also, are there any policy changes? I talked about utilization tracking. That can sometimes signal changes in HR policy about, the reason we're tracking this data is to improve the use of our space and reduce our costs. That could certainly become a HR policy. And then the final point certainly is the investment in technology. It is imperative that you have technology, be it just as simple as badging or up to more complicated like Wi-Fi, in order to implement the Agile workplace. From Suncor's perspective, and there's some great metrics here that I'll let you read through. For me, I think one of the most important metrics here are actually a story behind the metric. The utilization increase was significant, from 50 to 92%. Putting it in simpler terms, or maybe more effective visual terms, Suncor over the course of that 3-year period were able to add 8,000 additional people to the portfolio without adding a single square foot of headcount. So I think that's a really powerful message. So it wasn't a cost saving so much as a cost avoidance. And with a cost per workplace, or sorry, per workstation or per employee of somewhere between $8,000 and $25,000, that saving can be significant. If you took even a $10,000 number, you know, Suncor's potential cost avoidance at 8,000 employees with no additional square footage is about $80 million a year. So significant savings. One of the other ones that I also really like on this in terms of, you know, proving out theory is that once they had implemented their agile environment, they actually had 4 times more people applying to work there, because the 10% that I mentioned that they negotiated to invest back into the buildings brought such significant improvement that people wanted to become employees of Suncor. So, you know, I think from a conclusion perspective, you know, space is underutilized. Again, there are different industry numbers, but anywhere between 45 and 55% is what I'm seeing within the industry. So there certainly are components within companies that can be improved upon. And there are many tools that can help that move to Agile. It's really important to recognize that Agile isn't just about cost cutting. There are significant benefits to the top and the bottom line as well. If you are interested in what I've talked about, you can certainly go to my company's website. We have a great white paper there on managing workplace utilization. You can also feel free to reach out and contact me at simon.davis@seraview.com. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass things back to Joshua and just see if there are any questions.
Yes. Again, if you do have any questions, feel free and type them into the question box. And also, if after the presentation you think of a question, Simon does have his email up, so feel free to reach out to him. Give me one moment.
Yeah, and please feel free also to connect with me on LinkedIn. I like using LinkedIn as a tool to publish interesting articles that I find, particularly around the topics of workplace strategy, around agility or agile workplaces, and then also around utilization. So I'll certainly be more than happy to connect with people offline on that basis.
Excellent. And they can just search Simon Davis and find you, I assume?
Yeah, if you put Simon Davis SeeArm, then it's pretty easy to find me. So.
There you go. We do have a question that says, which came first, the Harvard study in slide 32, the engaged employee, or the employee made happy by Agile Space Management?
I don't know, Joshua, if you can communicate, but in terms of, first from a chronological perspective, in terms of which were published?
Yeah, it seems like, yeah, chronologically, because then they follow up said, it seems recursive or strongly correlated, 2 measurements of the same thing.
Yeah, honestly, I would have to go back and check from my sources on the dates, but I'd be happy to follow up with the individual in question.
Okay, excellent. Well, very good. Okay, if you want to go to the next slide. There we go. And this is just showing you what some of the upcoming presentations are. The next one is Facility Management to Blame for Workplace Injuries, presented by Allison Heller-Ono. And then Paul Doherty, who has another one following that. I'd love to have you on those presentations. Next slide. And the FMCC does have an app out. You can go ahead and download that for Android or iPhone at Google Play or iTunes. Next slide. And as always, the FMCC is looking for volunteers, for people with great ideas for webinars, white papers, etc. If you'd like to be part of the FMCC STAG, please feel free and reach out to Ricardo. His email is on the slide on your screen. He is the STAG chair for the FMCC. Next slide. And the FMCC does like just to let everyone be aware of the other councils and communities that are out there to serve the FM community. Next slide, please. There we go. Simon, I want to thank you for a great and interesting presentation. Thank you for taking your time out to do this for us. And I want to thank everyone for attending, and have a great rest of your World FM Day.
Thanks, Joshua. Thanks, everybody, for attending. I really appreciate it.